Following Caesar's crowning achievement at Alesia, in September of 52 BC, Gaul was still dotted with pockets of resistance. To maintain as much control over Gaul as possible, Caesar scattered his legions to winter throughout the region. As the snows settled, Vercingetorix's tribe, the Arverni, remained in revolt. Deciding not to wait for spring, Caesar marched the forces in his charge across central Gaul, where he surprised the Arverni, driving them to sue for peace. Caesar next marched against the Bituriges tribe, and, once again, invaded the town of Avaricum. The Bituriges surrendered, desiring peace. When Caesar marched his legions to the Aedui town of Bibracta, to camp for the remainder of the 52-51 BC winter, the Carnutes tribe attacked the Bituriges for having submitted to Rome. Caesar, once again, acted swiftly. His forces left Bibracta and surprised the Carnutes by taking the town of Cerebum. After the Carnutes conceded defeat, Caesar remained in Cerebum for the rest of the winter. In the spring of 51 BC, after leaving several of his legions under the command of one of his legates, Gaius Caninius Rebilus, Caesar marched the remainder of his forces into the heart of Belgae territory, where the Bellovaci and Atrebates tribes were still in revolt. As Caesar approached, the Bellovaci, under their leader, Corius, and the Atrebates, under the leadership of Commius, abandoned their lands and employed guerrilla warfare tactics against the Romans. During one surprise attack against Caesar's forces, however, Corius was killed, and the remaining Bellovaci disbanded, ultimately suing for peace. Commius and his army of Atrebates were not ready to bow to the Romans, and continued their hit-and-run war, drawing Caesar further east. In the south, the leader of the Carducci tribe, a chieftain named Lucterius, gathered the disaffected contingent of rebels who still wanted to fight, and combined them with those who had flocked to the Senones tribal leader, Draps. Together, Lucterius and Draps attempted another invasion across the border, into Roman Transalpine Gaul. Unfortunately, they were stopped by Caesar's legate, Gaius Caninius Rebilus, and were forced to withdraw to the oppidum of Usilodonum. Mindful of the situation Vercingetorix faced at Alesia, and not wanting to find themselves facing starvation, Lucterius and Draps made certain that the oppidum, protected by mountains on one side, and almost completely surrounded by a river, could not be cut off from provisions by the Romans. Stocking the oppidum with plentiful food supplies, the forces of the combined Gallic tribal leaders sat down in Usilodonum, where they intended to wait out the end of Caesar's proconsular term in Gaul. Once Caesar was gone, Lucterius and Draps intended to begin a new revolt against Caesar's successor. But, with civil war looming on the horizon, Caesar could not afford to leave his work in Gaul unfinished, and have rebellion pop up again, at an inopportune moment. By the time Caesar arrived at Usilodonum, Gaius Caninius Rebilus had built sufficient siege works to assure Caesar that, between the Roman fortifications, and the natural fortifications surrounding the oppidum, the city was securely cut off. The arrival of another of Caesar's legates, Gaius Fabius, added an additional 2 legions to those camped outside Usilodonum. Caesar, after being informed that the oppidum was stocked to endure a lengthy siege, now turned his attention to the water. The town had an abundant supply from 2 separate sources. The main river, which flowed down from the mountain, was too powerful to divert, but Caesar noticed that there was only one location from which those trapped inside could access this water. Placing archers, slingers, and even a 10-story siege tower at the location, any attempts to collect water at the site were met with a violent barrage of attacks from the Romans. There was a second source of water, however, which Caesar could not so easily manage, that was accessible to the townspeople. But before long, Caesar's men came to him with information that revealed the water's underground source. Ordering his engineers to begin digging a series of tunnels, Caesar was eventually able to divert the town's second source of water from below the ground. The Gauls inside Usilodonum had no idea that the Romans were at work beneath their feet, and when the second source of water ceased to flow, they took it as a divine sign that their gods had abandoned them and surrendered. Caesar, who felt that his clemency had been sufficiently publicized across Gaul, decided to impress upon the Gallic tribes that his mercy should not be taken for granted. Choosing to let them live, Caesar, instead, cut off the hands of every man who was old enough to hold a weapon. Many of these men were then paraded across Gaul, while others were forced to march alongside Caesar's baggage train as he toured the region, each an example that the patience of Caesar, and of Rome, had reached its climax for any who rebelled. Lucterius, who did not want to fall into Roman hands, had fled into the mountains before Usiladonum had yielded to Caesar. In the nearby Arverni lands, Lucterius sought refuge within the tribe that had produced Vercingetorix. But Caesar's brutal message to Gaul, delivered by the sword, had been received. The Arverni betrayed Lucterius, turning him over to Caesar as part of their peace negotiations. When the Atrebates, under the leadership of Commius, fell in the northeast, Gaul was finally pacified. According to Plutarch, during his conquest of Gaul, which lasted from 58 to 50 BC, Caesar destroyed approximately 800 cities, subjugated 300 tribes, killed 1 million Gauls, and sold another million into slavery. By 50 BC, only a third of Gaul's total population had survived Caesar's conquest. As Caesar was quelling the last of Gaul's rebellions, he was also keeping his eyes on Rome's political situation. Since the death of Publius Clodius, in 52 BC, the conservatives had fully united behind Pompeius Magnus, whom they meant to use to safeguard their interests, as Sulla had once done. And though his 10 tribunes of the plebs had secured for Caesar the right to stand for his next consulship in absentia, Pompeius had pulled a fast one. By legislating the Lex Pompeia de Provinces, Pompeius had guaranteed Caesar would become a private citizen following his next consulship. Caesar, who was likely making plans to avenge the death of Marcus Licinius Crassus by leading a retaliation campaign into Parthia, instead, faced the very real possibility of prosecution and exile. This, Pompeius had done while simultaneously augmenting his own proconsulship of Hispania with an additional 5-year term, guaranteeing that he would have legions after Caesar had none. Caesar, expected to announce his in absentia candidacy for the 49 BC consulship during the summer of 50 BC, changed his mind. Pompeius's law only shielded Caesar from the hands of his political enemies for a year. By the end of his consulship, Caesar could expect to be dragged through the courts by Cato, Metellus Scipio, or any number of the Boni who hated him. And with Pompeius under their control, it would not have been difficult for Caesar to imagine a trial, not unlike the trials of tribunes of the plebs, Titus Manatius Plancus and Quintus Pompeius Rufus, who were both tried before a court packed with conservatives by Pompeius Magnus. The Senate, dominated by the Boni, had already demonstrated its hypocritical pro-Pompeius bias, for all its noise about Caesar's illegalities. After Caesar had sent 2 legions, one belonging to him, and the other belonging to Pompeius, back to Rome, in order to be transferred to Syria, the Senate played its hand. Instead of sending those legions to Syria, after being informed that the threat to Syria had been managed by Cassius and Cicero, the Senate gave both legions to Pompeius Magnus. In purchasing the services of the 50 BC tribune of the plebs, Gaius Scribonius Curio, as well as the consul, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who had withdrawn from the conservative camp, Caesar had been able to sway public support away from Pompeius. By calling for a disarmament vote within the Senate, Curio had forced Pompeius Magnus into a position which revealed to the Roman people that it was Pompeius who was, in fact, unwilling to lay down arms, despite an overwhelming majority vote in the Senate. And when Caesar moved, with some of his legions, to Ravenna, the home office from which he governed his province, panic arose in Rome. Fearing that Caesar was marching his legions south, a group of Pompeians rushed to the home of Pompeius, outside Rome's border. Offering him a sword, they entreated him to take up arms and lead him against Caesar. Accepting the sword, Pompeius Magnus began touring Italy, where he spent the end of the 50 BC year raising more legions, preparing to wage war against Gaius Julius Caesar.